Did Jaime Lannister really get redeemed, or was he always destined for a tragic end? The debate rages on, but we're about to put it to rest. Join us as we dissect the most convincing fan theories, laying out the evidence that will force you to completely re-evaluate the Kingslayer's entire arc and his place in Westeros history. Let's start with the basics. What even is redemption in Westeros? It's not like the stories. There are no white knights riding in to fix their mistakes, no magical absolution for past sins. Redemption here is messy, incremental, and often incomplete. For years, fans have split into two camps: those who see Jaime's journey from Kingslayer to Winterfell's defender as proof of true change, and those who argue his final return to Cersei was a surrender to fate, undoing every step forward. But to settle this, we need to stop asking if he achieved redemption and start asking if redemption was ever the point. First, let's unpack the redemption arc theory, the backbone of why so many viewers rooted for Jaime. The evidence here is impossible to ignore. This is the man who pushed a child out a window to protect a secret, who laughed off Joffrey's cruelty, who spent decades hiding behind cynicism to avoid confronting his guilt. Then came the Hand, his literal and metaphorical loss of the identity he'd built as a Lannister weapon. Captured, humbled, forced to rely on Brienne of Tarth, a woman he'd mocked for her devotion to honor, he began to unlearn the lessons Tywin and Cersei had drilled into him. He saved Brienne from a bear pit, not for glory, but because it was right. He gave her Oathkeeper, a sword that symbolized the oath he wanted to keep, not the ones he'd broken. He fought the White Walkers alongside the North, a Lannister standing against the very people his family had terrorized for years. To supporters of this theory, these acts aren't just good deeds, they're a rejection of his old self. When he dubbed Brienne a knight, he wasn't just honoring her, he was honoring the knight he'd once wanted to be. This, they argue, is redemption, not erasing the past, but choosing to be better than it. But the tragic fate camp fires back with a brutal question. If he was truly redeemed, why did he run back to Cersei? This is where the most compelling counter-theory emerges. The idea that Jaime's redemption was always a facade, a temporary detour from the darkness he was born into. Lannister pride, they say, isn't just a motto, it's a cage. Tywin's voice haunted him. "You're a waste of a good name. Cersei's love was a noose he could never untie. We're monsters, us Lannisters," and even his brief moments of heroism were rooted in guilt, not growth. Consider his final choice: abandoning Brienne, abandoning the North, abandoning the man he'd started to become, all to die with Cersei in a collapsing Red Keep. To tragic fate theorists, this isn't a mistake, it's destiny. Jaime was never meant to be a hero. He was meant to be a cautionary tale, a man who tasted goodness but couldn't hold on to it, because his blood and his past were stronger than his will. The evidence here is in his own words, from the first season to the last. "I've never been much of a hero," he admits, and in the end, he proves it. But let's dig deeper, because the most fascinating fan theories don't pick sides. They ask, what if Jaime's story isn't about redemption or tragedy? What if it's about the impossibility of separating the two? Take the dual identity theory, which argues Jaime was never one person. He was always the Kingslayer, and the man who saved King's Landing from Aerys's wildfire, the Lannister and the knight, the monster and the hero. His arc isn't a straight line, it's a pendulum, swinging between his worst and best selves. The key evidence here is his relationship with truth. For years he lied about why he killed Aerys, letting the world call him a traitor because admitting he'd saved thousands would mean confronting the fact that his dishonor was actually honor. When he finally tells Brienne the truth, "I was the Kingslayer, but I was also the King's savior," it's not a moment of redemption, it's a moment of acceptance. He stops trying to be one thing or the other. He accepts that he's both, and that's okay. Then there's the intent versus outcome theory, which forces us to reevaluate what redemption even means. Jaime never set out to be redeemed. He set out to survive, then to atone, then to understand. His final choice to go back to Cersei, was it a failure, or was it the most honest thing he ever did? Think about it. Jaime spent his life running from his feelings for Cersei, from the guilt of their incest, from the fact that she was the only person who ever saw him as Jaime, not the Kingslayer or a Lannister. Going back to her wasn't about choosing darkness, it was about choosing truth. He knew she was a monster. He knew she'd burn Westeros to the ground. But he also knew he couldn't live with himself if he let her die alone. That's not redemption. That's humanity, messy, contradictory, tragic, and beautiful. The evidence here is in his last moments with Brienne. When she begs him to stay, he says, "I'm sorry." Not, "I don't want to, but I can't." He's not rejecting the good he found. He's admitting he can't outrun the bad. So let's put the debate to rest. Jaime Lannister wasn't redeemed, and he wasn't destined for tragedy. He was a man who made terrible choices, then tried to make better ones. A man who loved too hard, hated too deeply, and struggled until the end to reconcile the two. The fan theories we've dissected don't just give us answers. They give us a way to see Jaime for who he really was, not a character in a story, but a mirror. He shows us that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, in our mistakes, in our growth, in the messy space between who we were and who we want to be. He shows us that tragedy isn't about fate. It's about choice. And sometimes the bravest choice isn't to be a hero. It's to be honest even when it destroys you. When we re-evaluate Jaime's arc, we're not just re-evaluating the Kingslayer. We're re-evaluating Westeros itself, a world that loves to label people as heroes or villains, but never stops to ask if the labels fit. Jaime Lannister's place in Westeros history isn't as a redeemed knight or a tragic monster. It's as a reminder that the most interesting stories aren't about good versus evil. They're about people, flawed, conflicted, human people, fighting to find their way in a world that doesn't make it easy. So the next time someone asks if Jaime was redeemed or tragic, tell them this: he was both. And that's why we'll keep talking about him for years to come.